Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the latest episode of the Precursive Perspective. I'm delighted to be joined today with our man in Boston, Stephan Hovnanian, who is with Sprout Social. Welcome, sir. How are you?
I'm great, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, lovely to have you on. It's been great sort of making the connection with you over the years. I'm a big fan of Boston as well. We watched the movie The Town recently, and I know that not all Bostonians are robbing banks like Ben Affleck, but it's great to have you on. Tell us a little bit about kind of your background and a bit about the scope of your role at the moment with your organization.
Sure. Yeah, the 8 years ago, I started at Sprout to help build a professional services motion, I guess, an offering. We had we're a social media management platform for brands. So what we do is usually larger brands. They want to consolidate all of their whole social presence, all the different motions around that, and one of our tools was more of an enterprise play. And so with enterprise, obviously, there's the need for services, there's an expectation for services. And so I was a customer of Sprout for a really long time, and had an opportunity to join the team and help build this motion out. I ran a consultancy mostly focused on web and email marketing before joining Sprout. So I feel like I've always been in the professional services space, even though not necessarily in title. And then over the past 8 years, the team has grown, the platform has grown to the point where we're mostly serving the enterprise market at this point. And so a couple of years ago, we built we've always provided consulting services, but we ended up packaging them in a way, which is a lot of what we're going to talk about today, into more of a subscription type of a model, in addition to your typical like implementation type service as well. So my role specifically has shifted from kind of overseeing all of it. We've grown to the point where now I've been focused more on the subscription side of things. And so, yeah, it's been a fun ride and really exciting to watch, to be part of this journey, because we're creating it as we go, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah, you always take when I chat to you, you always take a lot of pride in that, and that comes across, which is nice to see because I think you really think about like the people as assets, and I think you understand the difficulties in building some of this stuff. You kind of need to get it right second time. So I was excited to get you on, I think, because kind of one of the observations that for me and within the services community that we talk a lot about in the Services Delivery Alliance that you participate in is the rise of subscription services, and that's driven by a number of factors, right? The need to provide ongoing support to your clients, and then hopefully you can actually monetize something which allows you to fund the team and investments and career development, all of the above. But to begin with, kind of like help us understand what was some of the customer demand that led to the subscription offerings for you guys? What were some of the customer behaviors and demand there?
Yeah, and I think we can even go back to the fact that we were offering these types of services, like the outcomes, the deliverables, et cetera, in a more traditional scoped format, on a recurring basis. So it was still MRR, but it wasn't built into like a success package, if you will. And so the types of things that we do, it's largely consulting and uh, and advisory type services, a lot of teach you to fish, if you will. We're able to work inside of our customer accounts, which I think most services teams are able to do. So it's not just straight up show me your screen and let me just provide you advice. Instead, it's let's operate like a true consultancy. Let's identify a problem, let's identify a solution, and then we can work together on executing to that, and then train you to kind of own it at that point, and embed that into your operating model, and get all the extra benefits and value out of that, productivity, brand awareness, things like that. And then we can move on to the next problem, which will maybe be a bigger problem or a different type of problem. Or in the space we're in, I mean, social media changes on a dime. So there's a lot of times opportunities to even just reset. A lot of personnel changes, new leadership comes in. And so just helping people understand, like, just take stock of where you are today, and then really be a great partner to them as a vendor, a great technology partner to them, so that the investment they made in the software is sticky, it's giving them value, and it can stand the test of time, as they grow as well. So that's a lot of what we do in terms of the style of work. The benefit for us, and this won't be the same for everyone, but we're really fortunate to work at a company where our software is fairly easy to use. There's no technical customization required. So I think people who are thinking about this should consider sort of how their brand shows up in the marketplace, and then how can you become a human extension of that with regard to services. Do you need to plug technology challenges? Do you need to plug knowledge challenges? Like, where can you fit in so that your customers can just get better overall? Because the last thing you want to do is to create this entire services business in the context of something that you can get, like, they could train yourself out of a job and then ultimately get replaced either by the product evolving, or you're filling a need that they can go hire somebody and then say, oh, I don't need you anymore.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was talking to that's all very interesting. There's a lot in there. So I think just to kind of play that back, I think one will be it'll be interesting to understand some of the framing around how you position these offerings. You mentioned success packages, which is great because it's aligned to driving customer success, which I'm a big believer in when you think about the orientation of these offerings. I think maybe you watched a webinar of mine, maybe when I talked about teaching to fish, but probably not. But yeah, that's bang on. And I think you kind of understand this, that you're either going to be a value add in this service, in this structure that you put in place, or you might be plugging a value gap when it comes to the technology. I like the way though that you're also thinking about that knowledge gap, right? Of like, actually, are you bridging some sort of expertise gap with your customer? And I think there's another one, which is like this, I guess, IP thought leadership piece of like, what can you teach them that's new, right? That can be driven by your software. So when you think about, like, as you reflect on what you've built, what are some of the key building blocks of this subscription services org? And by the way, is that the right term for it for you guys internally, subscription services, or is it success services? What is the correct term?
Well, the package we sell is called Premier Success. It is technically a support package if you think about it, and this ties into actually the question that you're asking. It's not a services package. It is an enhanced engagement model for success, and so it has basically it's a three-legged stool. It includes a priority support queue for our technical support team. It includes some extra level of dedication and roles and responsibilities for your customer success manager. So it's essentially a pay-for-play model in that regard. Guaranteed a CSM. There's certain things that they're absolutely going to make sure that they do compared to maybe others in their book where it might be optional. And then the main differentiator, which tends to be where all of our sales reps lean into, is the fact that there's also going to be some embedded services. And that's, by the way, that's the org style that we have. We're an embedded services org. And so there'll be some embedded services in this package. So yeah, it's more of an enhanced support package, if you will, which is great when it comes to talking to procurement because it helps accelerate the deal cycle. There's no SOW required. It's subscription service. It's a subscription service, so the taxation is a little bit different, I think. But that ties to your, some of the things the question you were asking before, which is, how do you kind of make this happen? And that is one of the biggest challenges, is making sure that everybody is using the right terminology, the right positioning for what this is, and also what it isn't. Because, in our world, right, there are clearly defined types of services. If I use the word managed services, that means something to someone. It also means something to procurement and legal. And so when you think about the buying journey for a customer and how you introduce something like this, it's really important to frame it in a way that helps a customer understand what they're getting, what they're going to get out of it, the value, the engagement model, et cetera. And so it's really important to have great enablement and also just really strong internal alignment about what those roles and responsibilities are. what it is, what it isn't. And I think the I would say the hardest part about this um, is providing the kind of storytelling that needs to happen in order to help a customer understand really what is the value. Because when you're selling time, it's very easy. Okay, time, I understand it. It's a finite thing. It's tangible in a way. I know I can get certain things out of that time, but this is a subscription service. We're starting with a skeleton, and it's essentially a fixed fee concept because it's, you know, we're going to scope things as we go. We're going to make sure that we're not saying yes to too much, or we're going to say yes to things in a way that keeps us inside of our budget, but the customer is not necessarily responsible for worrying about that. That's on us. And so making sure that we are all really clear on how to tell that story to a customer so they know what they're buying makes it easier for them to sell it up internally.
Do you get asked though by prospects or clients, like what's the level of effort that you're going to put into this? Do you ever get any of that exploratory type like conversation, like how many hours or how many days do we get per period of time? If does that come up at all?
It does, in part because of how, again, like when you're initially presenting this, the easiest way is to say, because you're going to do this for yourself, say, all right, how much time are we going to put into this particular package? Maybe it's, you know, 30 hours a quarter worth of consulting time. Our consultant will figure it out, you know, what that is. So you're going to put that in front of the customer, and the customer is going to say, cool, what does that 30 hours get me? And so now this is where it's really incumbent on you. And a great way to do this is to just start with the traditional model of, you know, SOW based work. Start to really think about, collect feedback from your team, your success team, your product team, or even your services team if they're doing implementations. Where are some of those sticking points? Where are some of those like longer term opportunities where the implementation's done, but we know that we're going to have to continue to build on certain areas, and then start to build out like a little menu of things that you could do in a more of an advisory or an ongoing support capacity. And then, you know, we have what I call our bag of tricks slide. So it's kind of like there's like 7 or 8 different categories, and then a bunch of little things that we've done, workshops, you know, playbooks, things like that, types of reports that we do. And I think it's also important to show that breadth to a customer as well, because going back to the point about framing things the right way, you also don't want to, you want your reps and everyone positioning this to feel like this is part of your ongoing, like the overall vendor partnership. And it's not a transactional type thing. I mean, we're doing projects. It is kind of like transactional in a sense, but the idea is that like, you can't, that we don't want you to think that, oh, I can treat you like I'm treating an agency, which is replaceable, or I can go and hire an intern and do the work that you're doing. It's actually a great thing to have happen. It's happened to us a few times too, where they've not an intern, but they've been able to actually hire the expertise in-house. We were a knowledge and sort of the bandwidth gap. And but the nice thing is now that they can do this in-house, we can focus on some other things as well.
Right. That's interesting. There's a couple of bits in there. So we were going to talk a little bit about like the GTM and the delivery models that you use. I'll come to that question in a moment. You've raised a really interesting point, which is the positioning of these services in a way that's going to create some more frictionless procurement. And I think there's a few lenses to that. One is if you're doing ongoing kind of T&M based work with existing customers, you could encounter, you know, delay sometimes, not always, but certainly there are occasions where it's challenging to get POs, right? Or to go through that sign off process. And if you're doing a bunch of little things, get a thumbs up on the Zoom here, then it takes longer. So the package allows you to reduce that friction. But to your point, if you're positioning it, you might be positioning something, I don't know, that you think's quite sexy, like success as a service or services as a service, but then it lands in procurement and they're like, well, what is this, right? Is it like you say, is it PS? And therefore I want to see a rate card. I want to see this, I want to that. And I've got different procurement negotiation tactics on that, because that's what people fall into, which is I'm selling this subscription, but I'm getting my ass kicked by procurement on rate cards and hourly rates and all of this type of thing, because again, we've got maybe buckets of hours or volumes in there. versus what you guys have figured out, which is, okay, we sell this as a support package and that is treated differently by or better by the clients that you have. So that's super interesting. That's a very useful insight, I think, for people to consider. So if you're thinking about building this, dear listeners, then do some, I always encourage people to do a lot of research, market research, customer research. That's the type of question that you need to be asking, is how should this be framed and packaged so that we don't run into big procurement issues? How do you like buying this type of stuff? How do you not like buying it? Because they may well go, don't call it managed services, call it this. Yeah.
Right.
Cool. So in terms of your org structure in GTM, let's understand a little bit more about that then.
Yeah. So there are a few ways to organize your teams, and as you grow, this is probably going to change and evolve over time. You could go verticals, you could do disciplines or use cases. Just general personnel alignment is another option. Like we have different success teams or like tiers, for example, based on maybe your spend, you're in a more of a strat book versus like a lower touch book. And so you could look at it that way. If you're just getting started, I wouldn't go there yet. I would say just hire the absolute best people that you possibly can, and and just let them see everything, because you need that data too in order to help inform what's going to make sense for your business. The partnership here's the main reason is that the partnership with your customer success team is so critical here, because that's part of what this is. It's not a separate, like, I'm doing this and you're doing that. Your value plans, the way that you approach your executive business reviews or your quarterly business reviews, the way that you're demonstrating value is so important, because you're in this type of an environment, and probably in most of like a recurring professional services engagement framework, you're an adjunct, like you're a spoke in this, and your CSM owns the relationship. So it's really important to understand how you show up, how they show up, but you're also working on a lot of projects. And so, one thing that's been really helpful for us is we built a role alignment, like workbook, and for our teams, our two teams, so that they understand, okay, here are the things that a success manager is expected to do over the course of a relationship. We'll just say like a monthly call, 2 EBRs a year, et cetera, et cetera. And how does the services team plug into that with the projects that we're working on? Also, so the customer doesn't feel like they're on like 27 different calls with us a month with 18 different people. Because you move into this model, like you have a lot of people talking to the customer, and you want to make sure that they understand like who to go to for what, and they're not also getting meeting fatigue, because eventually then they're just going to say, forget it, I don't want to talk to you. And then it gets harder to deliver value, because you do need to get in front of these people and you need their alignment on what's important to them. So I know I moved a little bit away from the org structure thing, but again,
This
like
is it. The engagement model is part of the operating model. So no, I think that's super important.
yeah.
The nuance down to the kind of hand-to-hand combat of how you like meeting fatigue is something we can have all the fancy McKinsey diagrams of operating models we want, but like you say, the day-to-day is super important. So no, please continue.
Yeah, and also understanding how your customer operates as well is super important. Is they, sorry, are they, is it like what's the level of sophistication that you're working with at the customer level on a day-to-day basis? Because here's the other thing is, if you're, in our space in social, it's still a very new industry, let's be honest. And the industry itself has exploded in terms of scope, because now you don't just have your traditional social media marketing, let's get stuff out on all of our channels and talk about who we are and what we do. You've got a much larger focus these days, and in the last few years, on care, and providing some level of community engagement, customer care, that really that one-to-one relationship on social, on public platforms with your customers, and not just an audience. And so that's a new discipline that social media teams need to understand. And normally care is gated. It's like inside, it's like on a telephone or in like a web chat or something, or email. Like it's not in the public eye. There's other elements like working with influencers and whatnot. So the whole scope of social has exploded, and our teams don't necessarily know how to, like, our customers may not know how to navigate all that, or there's other teams that have to get involved. So point being, knowing the landscape of what the company could potentially do in your space, like what's the scope of like their, their presence in your, the market that you serve. Where could they potentially go? Like, well, where are they today? Where could they go tomorrow?
Yep.
Broadening the scope of their role, how they would use your software, use cases, et cetera. And then, and then how do you help them? How do you help them get there at the end of the day? And, when you're working, if you have an opportunity to work with people who can make some of those decisions, then that's awesome. But if those people are really hard to get a hold of, then, you again, back to the engagement model, you have to figure out how are we helping our line managers, for example, who we're talking to every day, articulate the value of what they're doing up to a director or a senior director or a VP, because those people are just not close to this. And I will say, right now, that's an area where we're putting a lot of focus, because we're a premium product. At the end of the day, we're putting people in front. Like, we're adding people to a technology purchase. People don't scale, so we're, just by default, we're premium, we're expensive. And so we have to immediately, the mentality goes to defending revenue as soon as it's sold. And the best way to do that is to articulate the value that you're providing, get buy-in. And if you can't get the buy-in, find out how to get the buy-in. So there's a lot of like that has to go into making this successful. And, there's always going to be people who kind of look at this as insurance. Like, all right, if I need you, I know you're there, and I know I can, reach out, and I'm really happy, and I like the overall company and the service I'm getting. I'm going to renew. But at some point, there's going to be a new executive leader who wants to come in and put your software on the chopping block, and you need to be able to, to say, "Whoa, wait, here's everything we've been doing for you and what it means for your business." And so you really don't want to go look elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that's also a skill for PS leaders. Like, they have to have this that they need to learn, which is the internal comms. I call it the FYI moment. Oh, FYI, we've been doing X or Y. I saw it once with a client who was a satellite comms company, and they had a very, very lean PMO team, and they had I got forwarded this email from one of our most lovely customers, and they were like, "I'll check this out." And basically the person who ran services operations there had sent around a note saying, "Hey, FYI, we've done this as this small team." And they put satellites in space, right? So they were running about $1 billion worth of these programs through our app, which was like super cool for us. Went out to America, saw this kind of like Doctor Strange love, if you ever saw that movie of the War Room, where they have the where all the satellites are over the Earth and all this type of stuff. And they were just like, "FYI, we've done this, this, and this." And they kind of bounced all the way up to the CEO. Was like, "Well done, guys." And I think, to your point, the role of these, the role of your team on helping people to be successful, but then articulating how they've been successful and not keeping it kind of hidden away, and just dripping that internally, so that when you do get to renewal, it's kind of like, it's pretty easy. I think one of the things that we've been encouraging people to do in our organization is actually drip some of that information into the procurement discussions. So one of our head of ops runs a procurement discussion with one of our bigger clients. He's our head of ops and finance, because he's got the relationship with the procurement person. And I'm constantly like saying, like, let's feed all of that good news in to that procurement person, of just like, FYI, did you know that we've done X, Y, and Z, A, B, and C? And they're like, "That's awesome news. That's great to hear. Like, I didn't know that," because they never know it. They don't know it internally. They've never heard it. But it's like, if your brand is associated with that impact and procurement knows about it, you know what? Little things like, you get paid quicker then. You get POs quicker then. So no, I think that's super interesting. One then, so kind of, if we move on to this, linking to the sophistication point, one of the things I think you think very clearly on is on the use of like a customer maturity model, right? So just to begin with, before we get into that, let's just frame, how do your clients evolve kind of their social maturity over time? Let's just start there, and then we can drill into the maturity models from there.
Sure, sure. And this is definitely an exercise that should be one of the first things that you at least try and sketch out. Like, it's not going to be perfect. And there's a couple ways to do it. It could be anecdotal stories. It could be some research. It could be customer stories. It could also be product data. And we'll call it more like demographic type stuff, like, customers of this, X size with maybe like this level of organizational structure or whatever. What we found for at least social sophistication, we also waffled on the idea of maturity versus sophistication, because people might feel like maturity might not be like, might come across a little weird, but hey, I'm gonna put that out there for anybody else thinking about this.
That's good. That's good thought. Yeah.
Yeah, it just does not roll off the tongue like social sophistication assessment. It's definitely doesn't roll off the tongue real easily. It's a pain in the neck to type, but we're going to go with that for now. So sophistication for us, for social, think about like, let's give it to the intern, or, just that mindset of like a more nascent org when it comes to understanding the value of social media in general and social data, more importantly. Very reactive, very siloed. They're the last people to find out. They're all the memes about social are aimed at people who are working at organizations, or I guess feel or work at organizations that they don't get it yet, and it's okay. But and then they're also so very reactive in terms of like their process and strategy. They're finding out about things very late. It doesn't feel like it's it's thought out. And then also in a much more siloed, like, business function or support capacity. So let's say it's primarily meant for, your marketing team. On the flip side, you've got like the business level of support would be very cross-functional. So you're looking at social data, for example, or you have a company that understands that social data is this gigantic focus group, and it's giving us a ton of real-time insights into how our customers think, what our competitors are doing, and all of this other, and also like how the space around us is evolving. There's a lot of great information out there for us, and when we go to make business decisions, the fact that we want to start at least pulling some of that information up front so that we can help inform our business decisions, and not just for marketing, but also for, customer experience, mergers and acquisitions, and all these other areas that social could potentially touch, product. That's where you're working with a very mature organization in terms of how they think about social and how they also support the business needs that help facilitate that type of work. Like, you have analytics teams, maybe you have a center of excellence, et cetera. It's not really about the technology you're using, although technology is a part of it. Also not about your budget, but budget's a part of it because it's the overall investment that you're making in this. And then, like, part and parcel to that is going to be more of a proactive approach to planning, process, strategy, et cetera. So what we did was honestly, it was like a DISC assessment. We thought about this. We said, all right, we can all agree that, what each end of the spectrum kind of feels like.
Yeah.
And then let's just start creating some definitions around, what great looks like based on what we know about some of the world-class customers that we work with, and also the ones that we, could be like, wow, you've got a long way to go, people. And so, like, how could we structure a questionnaire, some definitions for each of the different stages of that, so that we could help a customer feel like you're making progress. And again, it's like I call it like, it's like career pathing for your social program. If you think about for yourself, like career pathing or skill development, you have to be able to show that you know how to do something. You can do it autonomously, and then also at a really high level. And then at that point, you've kind of, you own the skill, and then you can start to look at like the delta to the next level, and like what else do I have to be able to do or be capable of doing in order to level up. So we put a lot of work and thought into, again, kind of creating just a really big skills map and matrix, and then associated that with questions, and then pressure tested it, I guess, in pre-sales calls, and in, like, it wasn't a soft launch, but it was like the idea of like, this is how we want to talk about this. So let's just start talking about it and see if it lands. And, some of the questions we've reframed because the answers we're getting were like, this isn't what I was thinking about. So it's been a really helpful exercise. And then from there, what you end up with is this profile of a social program. So you're like, okay, here's where you are. I can show you this to a customer, which is also adding value from day one. Here's where I feel that you are as we get going with all of these services. And, like when we do the readout, is this a window into your soul? Yes, absolutely. Like I completely identify with this. This makes a lot of sense the way you're describing us. And it's just a combo. It's like you're like, one of the things is more nascent, the other one is a little bit more mature, maybe in the middle of the band. And there's like what, 9 or 10 combos of all of those different maturity levels. We've written up definitions for them all. So this whole process is a very scalable process once you get the framework in place. And then from there, we're like, all right, I know now based on where you are, there are certain things that you're going to want to do, but they're not going to land. Like a great example of this was I was working with a customer one time who had really, really sharp, like they were super sharp in social. They wanted to, they wanted to leverage a certain piece of technology around social and bring some really great insights up to their leadership. Their leadership had no idea what was going on. Like they were completely clueless to this, very old school, if you will. And so we said, listen, you are fully capable of being over here, but you're going to do all this extra work. You're going to put bang your head against the wall because all these insights you provide aren't going to land. And so you're going to have a hard time articulating value, and then you're just going to get frustrated. So instead, let's do this instead. And then we'll kind of help you build that case and build that talk track internally and get the buy-in. And all the while, we don't have to teach you how to use the technology. We might have to for another customer who's kind of like not as sharp as you. And that's the beauty of this is you can, based on what you learn about everybody that you're working with and kind of where they are in the spectrum, you can tailor essentially the same services to each different customer without making it like a bespoke, super custom model. It's kind of like how restaurants have, they'll have like an ingredients list, and then with those ingredients, they're mixing and matching, they're doing different types of combinations or whatever, and you have 15 dishes on your plate or on your menu. And essentially there's a lot of overlap there. So it's the same kind of concept when you're thinking about how you structure these. You would have various outcomes and goals that you want to try and accomplish to help move the needle on maturity. And then from there, you look at like, where can I help you based on your skill set, based on the support that you have in the business, and maybe like how you're thinking about, the tool, like the software that you have purchased and how I can help you with that. So you might take some of it off of their plate. You might do more of an advisory type thing. But ultimately you've created this path to value that everybody kind of signs off on. And I'll wrap up with my favorite part about that, because once people have signed off on that, when they come to you with something else, you are now in control. So this goes back to the concept of like, you're putting this out there and we have to figure out how to avoid scope creep in this type of a model because we don't have SOWs. So we've aligned on a plan. If you come in with something else, we have to say, we have the opportunity to say, yes, I can do this. No, I can't. We have to reprioritize. Or yes, I can, but it has to be this way, unless we want to maybe have a broader discussion around reprioritizing. So like you're essentially in control of how you scope and frame, any type of ad hoc stuff that comes in.
No, I like that. I think that's a really good way of explaining the choreography, right? And how that choreography, how the journey that you plot out that the client's going to go on allows you to formulate a methodology to take them down that path that is scalable, but it also provides a pushback mechanism for stuff outside of that. And there's kind of it's one of those things where you see it in sales cycles where it's like, hey, can I have that thing? It's like, well, why do you want that thing? Well, because of this reason. How important is it? Well, it's really important. Okay, it's going to cost you $50,000. Oh, well, it's not that important, right? And I think this is kind of like you say, is a very good way it's a set of playbooks. It provides consistency. There's a lot of time and effort, right? This has taken you years, I would say, to get to, right? You're nodding your head, so yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think we've seen the same thing. I think what's interesting as well is you kind of have these windows of opportunities in which to do these things, right? I mean, I think that's one of the things with our customer base that we can see is like, you know, you can only do sort of small tweaks on things at a period of time where there might be, excuse me, like a large org change or a restructure going on. People don't want to do a huge amount of work alongside that because that's so time consuming, for example. So you have these kind of windows of opportunities. And I think within those windows, this type of maturity model or this type of sophistication assessment allows you to kind of plot that course. So I think when you think about um, when you think about that choreography, right? Just if just kind of finally on this topic, like what what would you recommend to like when you say you sort of mapped out, this is a question that we didn't plan, but when you say you kind of like mapped it out, who's in the room when you're doing that? Is that your team, CS, sales, marketing, product? When you're working out this path, this model, who from your organization was in the room at different stages for that exercise?
That's a great question, and it will vary a little bit based on the complexity or maybe the size of the account. Um,
Yep.
for example, if you're doing a land and expand with an account, gigantic global brand with all kinds of different subsidiaries that you're trying to eventually bring into your technology, you're going to take a little bit different approach in terms of how we set this up. It'll be a little more strategic. The things you're going to put on your, like now, next, later kind of timeline as far as
Yep.
your action plan are going to strategically align to the deal cycles that your sales rep is running to kind of grow, grow the account. If that's not in place, then largely this is just, it can be a success and ProServe, motion where you're just making sure the two of you are aligned. Um, I would say normally your product team has some kind of measures or health measures that you'll want to try and track to because your product team understands what is what's healthy. And one really nice thing is that this type of service is, again, because you're adding people to it, and you're helping people at the end of the day. It's a support model. So ultimately, like, you're going to find that the accounts that have this type of service attached are largely going to be healthier. They're largely going to, have
Yep.
less churn. They might even grow a little bit more. You'll have an opportunity to, get them into more betas and really push the envelope around the product because now you have power users on top, which are your team, on top of the customer who wants to do certain things. But like, you're in all of these accounts every day, so it's a nice opportunity to bring the product team and the product marketing team into the fold. I would recommend building some bridges there so that they aren't operating in their own silo and that you have a bit of a feedback loop with the things that you're accomplishing, because then you could take that knowledge and then scale it out to other parts of the org where people aren't buying services and where like maybe some lower tier customer bases or segments where this doesn't make as much sense because people aren't scalable, right, at the end of the day. But you are a software company, and you want to reduce the churn as much as possible. That is the ultimate goal, is a healthy customer. So those are some, but largely it's our consultant and the CSM are working together. Now on the customer side, try like hell to get somebody with decision-making power and the vision, if you will. Doesn't necessarily have to be a CMO. Maybe try and or a VP. You try and bring them in to bring that executive leadership into like a business review, where you're recapping and articulating. But at minimum, somebody who is responsible for setting the vision of the work that these teams in your software are doing, because they need to know what's going on. They need to know that this was a good investment and that their teams are working the way that they are expecting them to. So you're being a good partner by kind of, pressing on that a little bit and not just saying, hey, I'm going to work with the social media marketing team only. We're going to deliver this action plan. They are by nature going to focus very tactically on very tactical things, but you want to zoom out. You want to level this conversation up. And then once that's in place, you have a feedback loop built in for yourself because you've already exposed a leadership sponsor on the customer end to the work that we're going to be doing, and you can now help feed that back to them and talk about the value that you've been providing.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense. So one of the things that I think a lot of people struggle with is is controlling the consumption, right? So just kind of we move on to that area for a moment, because I think some of my experiences in this area is there's a flip of what you described, which is actually so we're probably more mid-market than enterprise at the moment. We've got, I would say, probably 15% of the customers in enterprise, and the rest is all mid-market up and mid-market. Yeah, I would say, yeah, 80 mid-market, 20% enterprise. Now, in the mid-market, we have quite a lot of access to like the senior leadership, and I think that's partly because of the thought leadership that we provide in our segment. But there's a flip side of what you described, is that actually sometimes we need them to be better at bringing in representatives lower on who can drive stuff forward, right? Who can drive forward an initiative, and who is the good citizen who's going to be the change agent within the organization, versus you're having a great conversation with someone who's senior, but they're so busy. And then it's like, okay, well, yeah, let's try and pick this up next week. And then, the call never happens. And then suddenly you go by and it's 2 months later and nothing's happening. And they're like, oh yeah, I really need to get to that thing. And it's like, no, we need someone else to get to this thing. We need to agree. This is, as you say, with that maturity model, this is where we need to focus. I think though, then that like, as a result of that example or other examples, many of your peers, there's this like, how do we better control the consumption, orchestrate things, organize it in such a way? So talk us through kind of like, let's start with like, what are some of the challenges that you need to be aware of if you're going down this subscription services route to begin with in this area?
Yeah. The biggest challenge that we came across, I think this is very easy to sell in a new business context because it's a support model. It's like, hey, you're a big company. This is what you should be getting. Fine. And then, by the way, like we packaged this in terms of how the customer thinks. So it's essentially one product, several SKUs, but the SKUs are just like more time. So and the way that we're approaching it is, so this is also like really important, framing this in a way that like, okay, if you want more of like a show me how, you have a pretty skilled team, well, we're going to do this package. This one makes the most sense for you. If you need more of a help me out, a little more like ad hoc services, or a little more just like education and validation, great. We're going to do this one because we want to work on more with you. So that's kind of how it's structured in terms of getting into like, more specificity. It's really just, it's a function of scale. Or time. And then in terms of the biggest challenge, so like with that in mind, you should be able to recommend the appropriate package and set the appropriate framing based on what the customer is telling you and what you're hearing from them about their challenges, et cetera. Where I think it gets a little funky is with existing customers. So in a growth context or a renewal context where you might be wanting to swap out some products. They already have a great relationship with their success manager. Like, why am I buying something premium? Meanwhile, you're like, hey, you need this. And in the back of our minds, we're like, because we don't want you to churn, or we don't want you to downgrade. So like, let's keep our MRR the same. So it's like, there's a little bit of that dance internally, and you're framing it to the customer like, you need more help. And you may not have necessarily qualified that the right way. And so that will happen. I guarantee you. It's funny, when we went live with this, we were expecting it to be more of a slower rollout because all of our positioning and our enablement was all about, like new business enterprise deals. So we're like, cool, we got time. And then we sold the crap out of it like within a month because everybody at year-end renewals and all of the, all of the opportunities to like bring services to the table for customers who are struggling our success team and our growth reps were like, they ate this up. And it definitely
Was it
created a
sold or
little.
was it given away?
No,
Did you
no,
say
no, sold.
sold? Yeah, yeah. I think people
Yeah.
will pay. Like that's the thing.
Oh
People
yeah.
there's this presumption that people aren't going to pay, even if they're not. Because I think if you've got that relationship with someone and you're earnest and you that like that shines through and the client knows that like if your product's dog shit, then sorry, excuse my language for those
Yeah.
in the Midwest, but if your product's poor, right, and then they're not going to throw good money after bad. But if they're like, there's a lot of potential here, maybe there's a bit of us, there's a bit of you, there's some change on both sides. They're like they'll pay for it, and I think it's good that you kind of called that out. So
Yeah.
you had a bit of a rush,
Yeah.
um, right?
But that but
So
that part's interesting because
yeah,
the way that you engage and maybe the way that you staff and the way that you collect the information from the customer to figure out what do they want to focus on? Because again, this is just a support package. So it's like all the scoping happens after the sale.
right,
Um,
yeah,
and
yeah,
and
yeah,
so, back to some of the challenges you have, reps potentially, and so why enablement is so important. You might be setting false expectations around start times and time to value and things like that. It's easier to do this and have that more measured, strategic approach when the customer is brand new and, it might be 30 days before they even touch the software.
yeah,
In a case where things are already moving, you're jumping onto a moving train. It's definitely something to be to consider. And for anyone planning this out, make that your focus. Like the new business part is the easy part, because all of your headcount planning, and all of the internal alignment you have to have. If you're going to introduce a premium service like this, and Jonathan, to your point, like the software has to be able to support it, the company has to be able to support it. You don't want to throw good money after bad. But if you are in that position and you're able to do this, focus on how you're going to create time to value and good headcount planning around existing customers, especially if you're a company with a lot of them, because then there's that many more sales reps adding that many more units to
yeah,
this, and people don't scale, so they can only handle so much time and so many accounts.
yeah. I think the other thing that you talked to me about this before, like this mystical, cheat sheet that you've got, the tips and tricks sheet, whatever you call it, that you
Bag
can
of tricks.
bag of tricks. That's it. I think it's those discrete little playbooks, right? Whether you call them playbooks, plays, whatever it is, the discrete little things. I think the other thing that we all do is the stuff that we think as vendors is really simple can be groundbreaking to our customers, right? Or just really super valuable. And so don't undervalue just like a reporting audit, a health check, did you know that you're using, X amount of data or APIs or these reports? And it's like, why are we looking at those reports, where those aren't even the KPIs anymore? And I think, we've just rolled out something which is just in and around reporting, right? Because we're on the Salesforce platform, which is very powerful from a reporting perspective, but also not super easy to use, right? It's complicated.
Yeah.
But once you master it, and if you've got someone, like you said, if you've got someone there helping you to do it, then it's like, okay, great, awesome. Right. Once you've got that dashboard and you're just hitting refresh, it's absolutely, I mean, it's how I run my business. So I think that, don't undervalue like the small stuff, right, in your bag of tricks. When going on to this kind of like expectation setting piece, right? So from that perspective, how do you control the consumption and how do you manage the engagement?
The thing that's helped us, especially when we think about the confusion around, are you a success person? Are you, like, what do you do? How do you fit into the whole scope of things?
Yeah.
Very project based. So, the talk track we would use is your success manager is in charge of the entire account, the overall relationship, make sure you have access to the right people and resources, blah, 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 blah. Our team is here to get hands-on inside the tool and help you execute on some of the key initiatives that we all agree together you want to execute on, and to help you level up. So it's still, and I think it's really important to keep in mind that like the focus always has to be on value, like business value, and not necessarily like transactional support. Actually, I'm gonna plug the Service Delivery Alliance, like the Slack channel. There was uh, a gentleman, I can't remember when, it was a few months ago, posted a really great post about like less Superman, more Yoda. And
Yes.
so really you need to think about your consultants. Yes, they're taskmasters. Yes, they get it. They are product experts. They can do things faster than most of your customers will ever be able to. But they need those skills to train themselves out of a job or to help people understand what's the next thing. Because that's how they stay valuable. And that's how also they stay in demand. Um, and that's also how you're able to level up the conversations. Because if all I'm doing is sitting in the back room and just building report after report and dashboard after dashboard, doing audits and fixing things inside your tool, it's replaceable and it's not bringing any of the value front and center. So really important skill, and your leaders should be able to help build that because it feels a little bit more like I don't know, you need panache, we'll say.
I think, yeah. So final point, I think super interesting episode. Panache, I think, is one of my favorite words. I think to get to panache, there's a lot of coaching around the types of very simple questions that one needs to ask. If you
Yes.
think about when you go in and meet the big boys and girls, and I do as well, in my career, your manager, your leader, or on the customer base, they always ask very simple questions, don't they? That you suddenly are like, okay, wow. And so I think just in this area on value, I think just how has this been helpful, right? Just very simple. How has this been helpful? How is this helping? What has been the impact of that? What's the ripple effects of that?
Mm-hmm.
Have you discussed any monetary impact of this? How would you articulate the change, or what's the impact of that? It's different versions of the same question. Like not what's the value, right? It's got to be simple, because then sort of bottling that and being like, okay, well, let's capture that. Let's make a note of that. Let's capture that together. And then in your internal QBR, you got one slide which is like boom, 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 boom. But I think overall, really super interesting. I think, Stefan, thank you ever so much. I think one is like several of the learnings is like one is again coming back to this language thing, which I always come back to in this show, which is like the importance of the language and the framing around what you're doing with the clients in the right language that filters through into how they perceive it, how procurement perceives it. That was super interesting. I think one is, an additional point is like that partnership piece is going to be super important. I think I think you described it as just like this joint value plan that we've got together, right? I think the teams really need to be just looking at each other internally and going, we're one team. Let's not be egotistical about who's doing what. Like ultimately, we should be going into these meetings with the shared agenda and the shared goals, which I think is again really, really interesting. And and I love the phrase window into your soul, because I think that is it when it comes to these things, is like you should be painting a picture of the window into their soul up front, in terms of this is where we want to get to. These are the problems getting in the way, and then here's how we get to the promised land. So no, awesome stuff. Did you enjoy it, sir?
I love this. You're a great asset to this industry, and I appreciate the opportunity to share some of the things that I've learned over time. So thanks for having me.
Oh, that's that. I didn't expect that. That's very nice of you to say. Just yeah, just this crazy Brit in South London, just trying to push the industry forward. No, I think that's nice of you to say, and I also it's nice to see some people like you, Stefan, who've actually kind of taken that forward. I've noticed you've been a bit more vocal about some things on LinkedIn and in the community, and I think if we all just try and help each other a little bit more, it all kind of collectively takes it forward. So no, thanks ever so much, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.